News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. It is such a pleasure to be on the air with you today. Thank you for joining me. If you miss an episode, every single episode is on YouTube. We have an extensive archive for you to enjoy. Well, I don't know about you, but I have a headache, a huge headache. Obama's foreign policy is nothing short of dizzying. There have been so many twists and turns that we tend to lose track what direction we're going in. And I think that is really symptomatic of this presidency. You know, there's so much talk out there as to whether or not he has a malevolent plan for America. He's this grand, evil mastermind. To me, it seems more than having some kind of grand, malevolent plan. He just is like a college freshman who is learning about the world and is discovering things that other people know already, adults generally know. He's bumping his head up against reality. He's making a mess of things. In other words, he's learning on the job. That's what it seems like to me. Well, he made a colossal mess of Iraq. I think his handling of Iraq is one of the worst foreign policy debacles in American history, where he literally turned a victorious situation into defeat. How? By simply ignoring the advice of the most brilliant military minds in America, the most brilliant, experienced minds in America. All their advice, that wasn't good enough for him. You know, like a college freshman, he knew better. And therefore, he pulled out American troops before he should have, and he left the region weak and vulnerable to a barbaric force like ISIS. And even when ISIS began its murderous rampage across Iraq, he didn't want to do anything because he really, really was hoping, just like a college freshman, that he would be known as the president of peace. You know, when you're young, you like to think of yourself as the hero, especially the hero of an idealistic cause. So there he was, the college freshman of peace, hoping that he would be able to leave that as his legacy. And then the beheadings began. And he realized, you know what? All my idealistic fantasies have come to naught. And now the American people want me to do something. So, like a schoolboy who's been scolded by his parents, he felt he had to do something. But just like a radical teenager, let's say, he doesn't want to quite imitate dad. So he doesn't want to have to do the same thing that Bush did. That would just be so darn humiliating after he made a whole career of saying that Bush was in the wrong and he knew better. When in reality, it looks like the only plan that was possible, that was really viable, was that the one that George Bush had laid out. But let's talk about that another time. So here he is. He wants to be the un-Bush. So now he's got to go to war. But he wants to do it in a way that doesn't look like Bush. So that's really what's going on here. It's very adolescent. It's very immature. So he wants to use American air power to attack ISIS because public opinion tells him he's got to do something. So he wants to do something. And he wants to do it in a way that doesn't look exactly like Bush. So we're not going to use ground troops. Again, the military is saying, listen, you got to use ground troops. I mean, ultimately, you're not going to be able to do this without some kind of fighting force. Well, you know what? Let's find somebody else to do this. Let's get somebody else. Let's get this ragtag crew of Syrians. We're going to train them. We're going to send them back into Syria. We're going to try to do something with the Iraqi army. Basically, apart from airstrikes, He doesn't know what's next. What he does know is that he just wants to hold on to this idea that he's going to conduct the war on terror and be different than George Bush. That's all he cares about, is to continue this false definition of himself as the anti-Bush, the un-Bush, when in reality, all he looks like is a little immature college freshman who does not know how to take good advice, who isn't wise and can't appreciate wisdom when it's right in front of him. Well, this week, the president launched strikes on Syria, and he also delivered a speech at the UN. Now, the press has made a big deal about some statements. One of the statements that so many members of the press have gone AWOL over is comparing the sectarian divisions around the world to Ferguson, Missouri, our own internal problems. I think that is a mistake that the president made. Obviously, that's a very stupid metaphor. But the speech has far bigger problems than that. Check out this line that will surely leave you flabbergasted.
Despite the headlines, this is the best time in human history to be born. For you are more likely than ever before to be literate, to be healthy, to be free to pursue your dreams. And yet there is a pervasive unease in our world. A sense that the very forces that have brought us together have created new dangers and made it difficult for any single nation to insulate itself from global forces.
I would really like to ask this question to the American people. Do you think that this right now is one of the best times in human history to be born? That is absolutely idiotic. He doesn't seem to have his pulse on what Americans are thinking and feeling, as well as what people around the world are thinking and feeling. He did say despite the headlines. You know why he said that? Because the headlines are so gloomy. We have an Ebola outbreak, which is extremely dangerous, not just to Africa, but possibly to us if it's not properly contained. So he talks about we've never been healthier. Well, we fear for our health almost every day. And I can tell you this as a mother, there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not looking at the news and thinking what kind of health problem my children may have to face or that I have to shield them from. I don't feel at peace when it comes to health. He talks about we're freer than ever before to pursue our dreams. Are we free? Here in America, I don't feel free. We've been battling the NSA since the revelations of Edward Snowden, where all of us feel as though we can be under surveillance at any time at the behest of the government. So there's no peace of mind when it comes to our health or our freedom. And more than that, the threat that terrorism poses is so grave, both at the homeland and abroad, that I don't think anybody feels that this is a great time in human history to be born. Even if we roll back the clock a few years ago, we felt better than we feel today. So his first statement, he is so out of touch with reality. He is there at the UN trying to cobble together a coalition of nations to help us in this war on terror, but he can't even begin the speech with the basic truth about the reality of the world today. Well, he goes on in this speech, and one of the things I want to highlight from it is something that I don't think this president or any president has talked about enough. Now, you remember that when Obama said a few weeks ago that we were going to undertake a campaign to degrade and destroy ISIS, he talked about we also have to wage this ideological war. But he didn't quite explain what we as Americans are going to do as part of waging this ideological war. Well, in the speech in the UN, he went on at length, appealing especially to Muslim countries and the Muslim youth to change the radical ideology that fuels all of this violence. Listen to this.
The second, it is time for the world, especially Muslim communities, to explicitly, forcefully, and consistently reject the ideology of organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIL. It is one of the tasks of all great religions to accommodate, devote faith with a modern, multicultural world. No children are born hating, and no children anywhere should be educated to hate other people. There should be no more tolerance of so-called clerics who call upon people to harm innocents because they're Jewish, or because they're Christian, or because they're Muslim. It is time for a new compact among civilized peoples of this world to eradicate war at its most fundamental source, and that is the corruption of young minds by violent ideology. That means cutting off the funding that fuels this hate.
Well, I think he makes a really important point, but I wish he went a lot further. One of the things that George Bush and Dick Cheney and the entire crew that analyzed the situation before understood is, look, we are going to undertake a war against terror, and we can send our troops in there and we can eradicate the terrorists once, but they're going to come back again. They're going to come back again and again and again. So what's the long-term solution? So they pursued something called a freedom agenda. Well, maybe the long-term solution is we've got to introduce democracy to these lands. And we now realize that just doesn't seem to be working. Democracy fails in a country like Iraq. It did not work. It was not able to be self-sustaining. It splintered so quickly, and we saw that the army doesn't have enough of a sense of national identity to withstand a powerful threat. So what's the long-term problem and what's the long-term solution? Well, the long-term problem that we face is this ideology. And the president was right to say that this has got to be a key part of this war on terror, is beating the ideology. So I agree with him on that, especially ensuring that we don't have successive generations of young people, successive generations of Muslims geared on this ideology. So he's right about that. But all the questions that he leaves unanswered, and the statements that he leaves unspoken are what is the root cause of this ideology? And how are you effectively going to root it out when so many of the adherents of this ideology claim to be the spokespeople for one of the world's foremost religions? You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, upholding values that never, ever die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
You make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven for too long, for too long.
Welcome back to American Heartland. This is Dr. Grace. Well, you know, this week, I got to be honest, when the bombs started to fall upon ISIS, I could not help but feel a sense of glee. I think that barbaric force really needs to be bombed right back into the Stone Age. So I've got to say, I'm all in favor of a very forceful campaign against ISIS, both in Iraq and in Syria. So I agree with the president's policy to a point. The problem I have with what he's doing is, I think, as I said last week, he's just Republican light or Bush light. He's not forceful enough. And as a result, we're not going to achieve victory. One of the great problems with his strategy is this insane, idiotic idea that there are some other ground forces out there that are going to be able to roll back ISIS and bring some kind of peace and order to the region. That does not conform to any aspect of reality whatsoever. In Iraq, there's an incredible story regarding Iraq and regarding what American military advisors have learned. It was featured on worldtribune.com, and it goes like this. It's titled, U.S. Military Advisors Learn They Can No Longer Work with the Iraq Army. Well, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have determined that 50% of Iraq's military was incapable of working even with the American advisors. Now, did you hear what I just said? 50% of the existing Iraqi forces are so untrustworthy that we cannot even embed advisors within them. What's the problem? Well, so many of them are considered unreliable, they are untrustworthy, they are linked to Iran, or they are linked to the former regime of Saddam Hussein. So what you have on the ground in Iraq is complete and utter treachery and disorder. So you can't rely on those forces. What about in Syria? The president has concocted this cockamamie plan that we're going to train some group there in Saudi Arabia and then bring them back into Syria. And they're going to be able to withstand both ISIS and Assad? Absolutely preposterous. The truth of the matter is this. There is only one force in the world that can truly defeat terrorists, and that is the American Armed Forces. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but there is only one military force that can defeat ISIS, that can defeat Al-Qaeda, and that can bring peace and order to the world. It is the American Armed Forces. And sooner or later, it's going to be American boots on the ground, as we always do, that are going to defeat these terrorists. Nobody else is going to do it. Other nations may contribute a modicum of forces here and there, but the bulk of the fighting and winning is going to be done by the United States of America. The sooner we grasp this reality, and the sooner we go forward, full steam ahead, no stupid rules of engagement, no restrictions on our troops, bearing everything that we have, all our resources, all our treasure, all our talent, all our training, we will rout these terrorists from the face of the earth quickly and effectively. You know, some people say, why should American boys die for Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan? Newsflash! They're not dying for Iraq or Afghanistan. They're dying for America. They're dying to protect American freedoms and American prosperity. And they're fighting for Western civilization, to protect the Western civilization from this scourge of radical Islam. So I think there's been so much misinformation out there. The point of the matter is this. The terrorists want to create a safe haven. They want to build a country, say, like the Islamic State, the caliphate that they have now call themselves, they've created. They want to build that so they can attack us. So when our American boys die in Iraq or in Afghanistan, they're dying to protect us. And so we have to face the truth and not look at the world with rose-colored glasses. The terrorists are coming for us. And the only way that we're going to defend ourselves is if we do it. And as the world's superpower, and as the world's best power and most benevolent power, I believe that we should do it. So what would my alternative plan be? I don't believe that we should just bash this president without giving an alternative vision. The president should be ousted from office because of the treasure and talent that he squandered and how badly he bungled this Iraq policy. We have to go back in there with air power and with troops, restore stability in Iraq as we had just a couple of years ago. And that would be step one. But the harsh reality that Americans are going to have to face is that we are the only game in town. Now, getting back to the president's policy, he's so desperate to be the un-Bush, the anti-Bush, and his acolytes out there are still deceiving us. Listen to how Susan Rice is trying to defend the indefensible.
Well, Matt, understand what we've been saying. We have been focused for many years, as you know, on al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, what we call al-Qaeda core. And that element of al-Qaeda, which is the one that hatched the 9/11 plot and executed it, has been substantially degraded and doesn't, at this stage, pose nearly the same type of threat that it used to. What has happened, though, over years is that al-Qaeda has metastasized. Imagine a cancer that had an original tumor. Now, elements of the cells of that tumor have moved to places like the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen, parts of Africa, Somalia, and what we call the Sahel region, Mali, and now also to Syria. So we're having to deal with each of these. As you've seen, we've taken action in Yemen, we've taken action in Somalia, and now we're taking action as necessary in Syria.
Well, you know what should be said to her? Listen, we're tired of your lies. We're just sick of it. You and the entire Obama team said that al-Qaeda was on the run, that it was practically dead, that it was defeated. And now you're trying to use a different word and say that it has, quote unquote, metastasized. Well, let me tell you something. If you want to use the cancer analogy, when cancer metastasizes, it was never dead. It's not dead. And it wasn't on the run. It's getting worse. And under this president, this war on terror that we are obliged to fight is getting worse. The world is becoming more dangerous because he's not up for the fight, because he's not willing to do what it takes to win. And this politically correct culture that we have is hamstringing our political and intellectual class. So we have to be much more forceful because let me tell you this, they're not pulling their punches. So why do we keep pulling ours? I'm talking about the enemies of America. They're not pulling their punches. Why are we pulling ours? And we have to deal still with this class of liars. They lied outright about how successful they were on the war on terror. And now it's come back to bite them as a dragon far bigger, far more scary than anything we have dealt with before. There are a few reporters out there, especially the ones that are right on the front lines, that are injecting a little bit of clarity and sanity into all of this. Listen to this.
I think the answer is, are they willing? In theory, they're willing. When you talk to some of their leaders, the leaders who are in New York, some of them with their hands out right now looking for money, looking for support, they say they are willing. They seem to be convincing Washington that they are willing. But on the ground, they are very weak right now. They are nowhere in a position to take ground. And that is the basic structure. Flaw of this strategy. The U.S. is backing both sides. The airstrikes in Syria are helping Bashar al-Assad, but the U.S. is also promising to support rebels who are against Assad. So this strategy sets up Syria in an almost permanent state of civil war, and that is the civil war that has caused all of the extremists to allow themselves to find a safe haven.
Bingo. Again, this president is too weak to craft a strategy that is clear, that chooses one side clearly and unequivocally. Look at what he's doing in Syria. So right now, he is launching airstrikes in an attempt to degrade ISIS. But who does that help? It helps Assad, because that's what Assad wants. But this president told us the whole time that he wanted Assad out, and he's not a fan of Assad. Well, listen, you've got to choose one side or the other in a civil war. You can't play both sides. Choose one. So at the same time as he needs Assad's permission to bomb ISIS, he's also signaling to Assad that he's going to build up a military force to ultimately oust Assad. What kind of treachery is this? This is not the United States of America. That's not how we treat allies. That's not how we conduct wars. Choose a side. Shake hands. Make a pact. And stick with it. It's not that complicated. And unfortunately, in foreign affairs, sometimes you've got to take the side of a person, of a regime that you're not 100% crazy about. You know why? Because the alternative is even worse. And that's the problem with this president. I don't know what alternative universe he lives in. But you can't have it both ways. You can't bomb ISIS, which requires Assad's permission, and at the same time seek to undermine him. Why not make a pact with Assad and rout ISIS with the cooperation of Assad? How about that? Why can't he do that? Why does it have to be so complicated and convoluted? So much so, as I began this show, that it's giving all of us a massive headache. And the signal it sends around the world is you can't trust America because America is treacherous. They're saying one thing to your face and doing another thing behind your back. Stabbing you in the back and supporting you. Well, we don't know which is which. Which means we don't want to do business with you. That's what many, many of our needed allies are beginning to conclude. And lots of people say, you know, America's experiencing a tremendous amount of intelligence failures around the world. Well, guess why, stupid? To build a network of good intelligence means you've got to have a network of trust. The Arabs that might provide intelligence have to trust that they and their families are going to be protected by American power. If you are an Arab right now, just think about this for a moment. If you're an Arab right there and you know that someone in a circle that you're familiar with is planning a terrorist attack, are you going to risk your life to get in touch with American intelligence operatives to send out that information? Why would you risk your life? Is there any guarantee that you and your family would be protected? No. So you will be silent. And it's all part of the same problem. American trust has to be restored around the world. It's not going to happen with this man in power. It's not going to happen with a man who is trying to play all sides, be all things to all people. And what we end up with is nothing but chaos, destruction, and war. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, upholding values that never die.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back to American Heartland. I love that song. It is about somebody loving you unconditionally. You know, I have the great blessing of having come from a beautiful family, a traditional family. My mom was a homemaker. My dad was the breadwinner. Together, they gave me all the love and support and moral formation that I needed to forge my way in the world and build my own family. And I try to transmit so much of the happiness of my childhood to my own children. And one of the things I emphasize in prayer every night is that we give thanks for the blessings of a happy family. I drum that into my children. There is no greater blessing than that of a happy family. Well, nowadays, the American family is under attack by so many different evil, malevolent forces. And we have today a distinguished guest. I am so honored to have her on the air. It is Phyllis Schlafly. She is a national leader of the conservative movement. She's a best-selling author. She writes a syndicated column which appears in 100 newspapers. She also does daily radio commentaries that are heard on over 600 stations. And she has her own talk show on education called the Eagle Forum Live. She now has a book which is titled Who Killed the American Family? I welcome Phyllis Schlafly. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Grace. I'm so happy to join you.
Well, I want my audience to know that this is a really brilliant woman with so many years of experience observing the death of the American family. Can you tell us who killed the American family?
Well, you have to read the book to find out. It's not just the gays we hear the most about. I think I've got 6 chapters of different groups who found it in their interest to try to wipe out the American family. The feminists, for example, were really anti-men. They think women are the victims of the patriarchy, and they should rise up and overturn men and their ruling of our country, which is just a fiction. But anyway, it causes a lot of antagonism and a lot of unhappy marriages. And then another effort to kill the American family has been the activities of the family courts. Now, this is tied to the expression, the best interest of the child. And that is a legal line that came down to us from the British. And it always meant that the biological mothers and fathers were acknowledged and recognized as the ones who could decide how to raise the children, how to spend money for the children, because they had the best interest of their own children at heart. And now, and somehow in the 1970s, the definition of the best interest of the child got taken over by judges. And now we have judges and so-called experts and psychologists of all kinds who are trying to tell us how to spend our money and how many hours a day we can spend with our children, and whether a child can play soccer or baseball, and all kinds of things. That there's no law that decides these. It's simply a matter of your gut reaction, what you prefer, and that's the way judges are ruling, instead of calling on the parents, the children's own parents.
And yeah, in your book you speak about experts that also contribute to this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How do they do that? How do they infiltrate themselves in our lives and undermine the family structure?
Well, you know, the American law is supposed to be made on fixed law, and then you come into court and the judge decides whether you obeyed or disobeyed the law. But when the warring parents, divorcing parents come into court, there are all kinds of questions that arise for which there is no law that answers it. For example, are you going to require a time for grandparents to visit? There's no law about that. And so when there's no law to deal from, the judges deal from their own biases and whatever they think. Just from the seat of their pants, they make a decision. And they call that the best interest of the child. So the judges are really deciding it. And there's no scientific evidence for that type of a system, but that's what we've been doing. And you know, people like libertarians who say they want to get the government out of marriage, they never talk about getting the government out of divorce. And when a marriage breaks up and they go into court and they have the argument, the judge is making all the decisions.
Yeah, that is a brilliant point. Getting the government out of divorce, closely tied with that, you have pernicious laws. Tell us what you think about the Equal Rights Amendment and the Violence Against Women Act.
Well, the Equal Rights Amendment pretended to put women in the Constitution and do something great for women. But if you ever read it, you know it doesn't mention women. It only puts sex in the Constitution. And what are we talking about? The sex you are or the sex you do? So much is left up to the courts, and that's not what we think is good for anybody. And when in the 10-year fight about the Equal Rights Amendment, I conclusively proved that there was no benefit for women. No benefit for women. Just think about that for a minute. They were told that this was going to be a great advance for women, but there's no right or benefit that women got out of it. And there are a lot of things that they lost. For example, the military draft. You know, when this came out of Congress, I had sons and daughters who were about 18, 19 years old, and my daughters thought this was the dumbest thing they ever heard. You're going to put women in the Constitution, and the first thing is we have to sign up for the draft during the Vietnam War like our brothers? You got to be kidding.
Right, so it acted contrary to the very people whose interests it's supposed to be upholding. What about the Violence Against Women Act?
Well, the Violence Against Women Act is very sex discriminatory. It's not opposed to violence against men or violence that may be started by women. And we do know from surveys that women start about half of the physical conflicts between men and women, and we call it feminist pork because it's resulted in giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to feminist organizations, which the women who come into them for help, they teach them to divorce and to hate men, and they have no plans for reconciliation of any type or form. And it's a very unfair law, but it puts a lot of money in the hands of these feminist organizations, a lot of which they use to lobby for their laws in state legislatures.
Right, but to play devil's advocate for one moment, if you have a woman, say, that is the victim of domestic abuse, and then she goes to an organization that's to help her, and they help her to get a divorce, you're basically saying that they should not be doing that?
Well, she can get we have unilateral divorce now. She can get the divorce without going to this feminist organization. There are other things that they do that are not really helpful.
So you just see them as this part of this liberal campaign that just encourages the destruction of the family, basically, where they get funds to do that. They get funds to do that.
They have no plans for reconciliation or for rebuilding the family. And basically they kind of teach the sons, try to make the sons part of the enemy at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also talk in your book about all of the government incentives that undermine the family, all the different tax policies and welfare reforms that, in essence, allow the government to step in as an alternative family, you might say.
Well, financial incentives are very powerful among both rich and poor people. And what we have are money incentives for a woman to have a baby or several babies, even though she's not married. And she gets handouts. There's 78 different types of handouts that they get, from housing to energy to school lunch to child care, you name it. There's 78 different kinds. And if a woman, it stands to reason that if a woman doesn't have a husband or the father of her children as a provider, she's going to look to government to fill in the gap. And that's what's going on.
Right, and I think you make also a brilliant point in your book that the more that we allow the government to act as a surrogate family, the more we give up our liberties.
Well, that's right. This country became the model of the most prosperous, the freest society in the history of the world, when we were a country of, they call them nuclear families. Nuclear, that is, around one center of a mother and father who are married to each other and raising their own children. And that was the lifestyle. I mean, I grew up during the Great Depression, and yet the family was intact then. It wasn't broken. Even the black family wasn't broken during the Depression. It's not poverty that causes the problems. It's the people who are out to make them believe that there's some better way than being married to each other. And if you're providing government handouts, that's an inducement. Now, I remember in 1946, the Congress passed the joint income tax return, which was very good for married families, and they got a benefit in the tax code. And now all the benefits in the tax code seem to go to the unmarried women who are having babies on their own.
Yes, and what exactly do you see as the relationship between the breakdown of the family and the destruction of our individual liberties?
Well, when you have a nation of intact families, they can spend their own money. They can make their own decisions. They don't need these busybody experts to come along and tell them how to live. And then once that breaks up, then they rush into court, and some judge is making all the decisions. Mm-hmm. The family court judges control really billions of dollars of family money now. Tell them how they can spend it, how it can be transferred from one household to another. And that's not the kind of society that promotes freedom.
That's exactly right. And tell me, we hear so much talk on mostly conservative talk radio, but not in the mainstream media. It is also male rights, male family rights that are being trampled on throughout all this.
Well, that's coming from the feminists. The feminists are really very anti-men, and they teach young kids that women are victims of the patriarchy, and that's so unfortunate. We love men, and we want to give them a mission in life, which is to be the protector and provider for their own family and their wife and their own children. And that's the way we grew to be a wonderful, free country, and we want to restore it again.
Yeah, you think about how destructive that is when we as mothers have sons, and yet this feminist ideology basically perpetrates the idea that the male, as you said, is a vicious patriarch whose natural instincts have to be curtailed at all times. It is so counter to what a loving mother would want her own son to believe about himself.
You're absolutely right. That's very true. And I am interested that there are some new polls that are coming out that are casting a new light on some of these issues. And one is a poll that was taken just last week or two by Forbes magazine. And they polled a lot of women who have good jobs. And they found that their hope in life was that their husband would make enough money that they could take time off and take care of their babies.
Oh, I know. Oh, tell me about it. Tell me about it. I mean, I have a very best friend who is she's a vice president of a defense company, and she just gave birth to a little girl. And all I hear every time I speak to her is, I wish that I wasn't the primary breadwinner and I could spend all my time with my little girl. And she tells me that I'm blessed that I have so much choice in my own life to spend so much time with my kids. So now let me ask you this. I'm so impressed with you, not just as an author, as a thinker, but also as a woman. You raised 6 children. And how did you manage to do that and also have the brilliant, stellar career that you have had?
Well, I was a full-time homemaker. In other words, I never held any paid job after I got married. And I did raise 6 children. And I have to say, I suppose one of my advantages was all my children were healthy. That's a great thing. I have a lot of friends who are burdened with children who are not healthy for one reason or another. And I was fortunate on that. But I'm a very hard worker. Just remember, I worked my way through college working 48 hours a week on the night shift, testing 30 and 50 caliber ammunition. And half the time I worked 4 to midnight, and the other half midnight to 8 in the morning, and then I went to college in the morning. And so I am a very hard worker, and I had a very supportive husband who didn't want to be in politics himself, but he loved enjoying it vicariously through me.
Right. So basically, you said you were a homemaker when the children were young, and then you delved into your own career when they were in school, I gather?
Well, the early years of this so-called career that I've had was largely on the telephone. It wasn't something that took me out of the home. For example, when I had one child, I did run for Congress one year, but I was never gone overnight. It was a district that only had 2 counties, and I could go out and give a speech and come back.
Mm-hmm. So hard work, another value that we don't emphasize enough. We teach the young to whine and complain and look for some kind of a handout instead of prioritizing like you did. Well, when the children are small, you sacrificed yourself on their behalf. And then later on, you pursued other pursuits by also trying to balance things with your tremendous diligence. I mean, those are all the values that I was taught. Rely on yourself, work hard, but put family first in all of that, because ultimately that's where your own happiness lies.
That's right, and I hope that your listeners will get my new book. It's called Who Killed the American Family? And I think it's not redundant with any other book. It tells you things, some people are trying to make it, it's only the gays who are against marriage, but it isn't. They're just one of many groups that think they will profit by eliminating the family.
That's quite right. This attack on the family has been going on for decades. And I have said many times on this program and on many others that heterosexuals are just as much to blame for the destruction of traditional marriage as homosexuals. And it's not just in the way that we have allowed left-wing ideology to penetrate our lives, but it's also in the unwillingness to remain chaste within marriage. I have to say that is a key element, too, of how heterosexuals are being degraded within their own families.
Yes, I agree with you completely. And another thing that is so unfortunate in the culture, when a girl goes to college, she's taught to join the hookup culture, so that she doesn't have any real alliances or permanent attachment to anybody. She just has one-night stands so that she can stay free and pursue a career and not even think about family till she's well along and well established in a career. Of course, by that time, she may have passed her years of fertility and she may not be able to have any children.
Right. And you know how I would summarize that? Basically, we're telling our young girls, make yourself so common that nobody of quality will want you by the time you're 30. That's really what you're saying to these young women. And we were taught the opposite. My father always taught me the opposite. Don't make yourself common. Make yourself exceptional. Make yourself desired. Make yourself wanted. Make yourself unreachable, unattainable. And I think that in the long run, even from just the pure shrewd perspective, being shrewd to get a great man that will be a breadwinner and will take care of you. That's the way to go. Not make yourself so common that nobody of any quality wants you. That's what we're telling our kids, our young women today.
Yes, they're being taught all the wrong things, and especially if they are wasting their education dollar on women's studies courses. I always say that when I lecture on college campuses, and a lot of jeers come from the feminist side, but that's the truth. They're taught a lot of wrong things.
They really are. Now, you do have a way forward in your book. It's not just telling us that the family's being destroyed and all the problems that there are to try to protect the American family. You also see a way to try to restore, preserve our families. How do you suggest we do that?
Well, I think you first of all have got to realize what we're up against and where the problems are coming from. And that's the purpose of my book. Know Your Enemy is the first chapter of winning any battle. And I think we need to know that it's coming from the judges, the courts, the gays, the feminists, the so-called experts, the college professors, the psychologists, all these people who want to tell us how to live our life and run our family. And there's no scientific evidence that shows there's anything better for raising children than the usual way of biological mothers and fathers raising them. You'd be better off listening to your grandparents than trying to get any advice from some of these people.
Oh, that is so on point. Do you know that nowadays when young women are pregnant, the first thing they do is go buy a book, like what to expect when you're expecting, how to parent. When I first had my children, I got a lot of books from my girlfriends, and I started to read them, and I immediately put them down. And the advice that I give young women is totally contrary to what the culture is saying. Forget all those books. You know, for generations, women didn't need a book to raise a child. And what you realize when you're a mom is that every child is unique and your own relationship with that child is unique. So the book really gets in the way because it's written by experts who are being very generic in the advice that they give.
Yeah, a lot of them may not even have any children.
That's quite right.
You do learn a lot when you have them. For example, I had 3 boys first, and then I had a girl. And I really wasn't prepared for her. I thought I had an invalid because all she did was lie at the cradle. She wasn't moving around like all the boys were.
Yes, I have one of each, so I know the difference. And I have to say, there's nothing better in terms of raising children than experience, right? So we tend to be better with our second child and our third and our fourth. I mean, what freaked me out over my first child, if he bumped his head, it would give me a panic attack for the rest of the day. With the second one, I just pick her up, give her a kiss. Okay, you'll be fine. You know, experience. And yeah. I think we neglect the true sources of wisdom, like you said, grandparents, others who have done it. They have a lot more to teach us than the so-called experts.
That's right. And, you know, it's kind of funny. There's a new word that's come into our English language, hypergamy. And that is the desire of young women to marry a man who's making more money than she does, so that when she has a baby, she'll be able to take time off and stay home and take care of the baby. And this is something that the feminists didn't expect, but it really is an example of human nature coming to the fore.
It really is. It can't be suppressed. You know, the desire to be with children, it overtakes most people, even the most diehard feminists, who learn all too late that they have given up their best years on idle pursuits instead of giving those years to what ultimately will make them even more happy, which is the loving embrace of children.
That's right. There was a feminist who wrote a book that had enormous publicity, and I've forgotten her name. I'm getting bad on names, but she thought she had made a remarkable discovery that women are less fertile after age of 40 than they are before. And she thought she was announcing this great scientific discovery to the world. And then you find that these over 40-year-old women who are going to the fertility clinics after they're 40 years old, with all these sex ed courses that we have in school, nobody told them that they were going to lose their fertility as life moved along.
So
and
true.
Too bad.
Yes.
They just, with all the sex ed courses we have, they didn't tell them that.
And that goes to show you one of the key points of your book. The experts are pernicious. They have a pernicious influence on our lives.
They have an agenda.
They have an agenda. Well, can you tell us where can they buy your book and where can they read all of your articles?
Who Killed the American Family is the latest book, the one we've been talking about. You could go to our website, eagleforum.org, And you can order that book and a lot of other goodies, all kinds of goodies. It's a gold mine of information. I have a weekly column that's always posted on the website, and my daily 5 days a week commentaries that are posted. And then the other books. For example, I did a book several years ago called The Supremacists, and it's about the mischief of these courts that want to run our lives. And it's out of print now, but I've put it on my website, so you can download it by separate chapters and have a study group.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for such a brilliant commentary today. That is Phyllis Schlafly, the author of Who Killed the American Family. I encourage all our listeners to buy it, read it, digest its contents. There is so much wisdom and tremendous insights from Phyllis Schlafly in this book. Thank you so much for being with us today. Well, you heard it right here, the American family under attack from so many different forces. They are all laid out in that book, and also brilliantly laid out a way to defeat these forces so we can all have a happy family. You're listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that are never, ever going to die.
I was born by God's dear grace in an extraordinary place.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.